Hello everyone. Thank you for choosing to watch this webinar. My name is Alexandra Pageorgiou and I'm a research associate at the Center for IT and IP Law of the University of Leuven, legal partner of the UPCAST Horizon project. Today, I will be discussing with you a very interesting topic which lies at the core of the UPCAST project, that of data sharing agreements and their automation. The rapid growth of data-driven services has transformed how different entities, from organizations to public bodies and individuals, exchange and monetize data. Central to this evolution are data sharing agreements and the platforms that enable their formation, execution, and enforcement. The UPCAST project responds to this challenge by developing a suite of interoperable, user-centric plugins that streamline negotiation, compliance, and automated execution of data sharing contracts. In exploring these innovations, it becomes essential to consider that both the legal parameters that shape contractual freedom and the technological means that support these data transactions. This webinar will be thus focusing on this topic and is based upon the research conducted under Work Package 4 and its findings. You can therefore find all the topics discussed today analyzed in a more detailed manner in their respective deliverables, including all references to legislation and scholarly work. Regarding the specific components of this webinar, we'll be first starting with a short contextualization and their relevance for data sharing agreements for small and medium enterprises, SMEs. Then we will move on to general elements on contract automation and take a look at the EU legislative framework. We will conclude with some special issues arising therefrom and some key takeaways of this presentation. These topics first very relevant for SMEs, not only for purposes of regulatory compliance, given the increasingly complex EU data regulatory framework, but also for purposes of business growth, requiring transparent and solid data sharing processes, as well as fair access to data so that SMEs can enjoy the same competitive advantages as bigger companies. Moving now onwards to some general introductory elements on contracts, it appears important to clarify at the outset that the terms agreement and contract do not necessarily coincide. A contract can be the legal document that reflects the formal agreement made between two contractual or more parties, or can simply refer to the agreement itself and thus not be legally binding. This consideration is crucial in the context of smart contracts, which will be discussed towards the end of this webinar. EU contract law was first systematized in 1989 with the principles of European contract law. Even though there are some international law instruments as Brussels I and Rome I regulations, these are a part of private international law that has been, of course, inserted to EU legal order, but they are regulating conflict of national laws and thus do not create substantive contract rules. EU directives, on the other hand, only harmonize certain aspects of contracts, especially in the consumer protection fields. With respect to the phases of the contract lifecycle as presented on the right, these include the generation of the contract, its negotiation between the parties, its final approval, and then its execution, performance, and termination. An important remark to be done here regards the terms execution and performance. Execution refers to the placement of signatures, whereas performance to the fulfilling of obligations arising from the contracts. This is particularly interesting in the context of applications where distinct fields such as lawyers and computer scientists interact closely. Smart contracts are an excellent use case, serving as proof of the complexity and certainly the challenge of speaking the same language. Various scholars and practitioners have worked on organizing the evolutionary phases of contracts into distinct categories. They discuss the gradual transition from paper to digital and then to automation. The first classification in phases starts with the computerization of contracts, to the total emancipation from paper, and then to content and enforceability shift. Smart contracts, as discussed later on, fall under the latter phase. The second classification on levels spans on over 5 levels, which vary from the paper contracts, so with an earlier starting point from the classification on phases, to full automation. Only levels 3 to 5 concern smart contracts, which, as already mentioned, will be discussed further on. Turning now to the legal framework governing electronic contracts in the EU. This framework is built upon several key instruments that aim to ensure that contracts concluded by electronic means are valid, enforceable, and secure. More specifically, these legislative acts include provisions on the formation and validity of electronic contracts, such as in the Directive on e-commerce, fairness and transparency obligations, in the regulation on fairness and transparency for users of online intermediation services, as well as the Directive on Consumer Rights, and of course validity and enforceability of electronic signatures as foreseen in the EIDAS and EIDAS 2 regulations. With respect to the EU data sharing framework, this framework is built upon horizontal and sector-specific legislation, With respect to horizontal legislation, recent legislative acts such as the Data Governance Act and the Data Act offer general rules on data transactions. These touch already known contractual relationships such as business to business, business to consumer, business to government, as well as public sector information sharing, but also introduce novel rules on data intermediation services and data altruism organizations. The Open Data Directive, formerly known under its previous state as PSI Directive, so Public Sector Information, regulates open data and the reuse of public sector information. And then, of course, the cornerstone of data protection legislation, the GDPR, which regulates the sharing as type of processing of personal data. With respect to sector-specific legislation, this legislation provides an array of specific provisions on a wide range of areas. And to be noted, of course, that for the purposes of UPCAST, the focus was put on analyzing and systematizing mostly the obligations of horizontal legislation, so we did not conduct specific analysis with respect to sector-specific legislation. Moving now forward to the specific issues to be discussed in the context of this webinar, contractual freedom limitations and requirements form a significant component of EU contract law. These limitations essentially describe the clauses which mandatorily have to be or inversely cannot be included in contracts or address certain aspects of contractual relationships. Mirroring the legislations mentioned in the previous slide, and insofar as the sharing agreements are concerned, a primer on limitations and requirements draws from first the DGA, which includes provisions on the prohibition of clauses granting exclusive rights on data held by public sector bodies, on conditions for contracts for the provision of data intermediation services, for instance concerning commercial terms and pricing of data intermediation services, conditions for access to data intermediation services, the right to withdraw consent given to data subjects, and then the DA with provisions on the prohibition of unfair contractual terms and compensation in business-to-business data sharing agreements, trade secrets protection, smart contracts and provision of information by data providers to facilitate interoperability in data spaces, and then the GDPR, which sets out the specific clauses that have to be included in personal data sharing agreements. This list is by no means exhaustive. As mentioned, there is a series of sector-specific legislations, some of which include additional requirements and limitations. Last but not least, on the topic of smart contracts, the last issue that we will be discussing today, the first to coin the concept of smart contracts was Szabo in 1996. He defined smart contracts as a set of promises specified in digital form, including protocols within which the parties perform on these promises. Since then, there is an abundance of definitions of what a smart contract is in literature, which serves as proof that there are diverse approaches to a concept that is still developing and shaping itself. Many doubts were expressed regarding whether smart contracts are contracts in the legal sense, since smart contracts are simply computer programs. As a result, they are not to be called proper contracts at all. Even though computer code indeed covers several of the issues and functions of contracts, these are not self-standing and thus constitute rather an execution mechanism for a set of deterministic obligations. In response to this ambiguity, some scholars have come up with a set of necessary components for a smart contract to qualify as a smart legal contract. These components include the smart contract status, form, contents, active function, and digital execution mechanisms. As far as the technologies that support smart contracts are concerned, blockchain is only one of them. Even though there was a big uptake of smart contracts thanks to the particular characteristics of blockchain, other technologies such as trusted execution environments and distributed databases are also widely used for the purposes of smart contracts. Smart contracts were introduced to the legal order of the EU with Article 2, Paragraph 39 of the Data Act, the key elements of this definition being computer program, automated execution, electronic data records, and integrity and ordering. Recital 104 of the Data Act goes on to further clarify that smart contracts are technologically neutral, exemplifying electronic ledgers as one of the technologies upon which smart contracts can be based. It also specifies that smart contracts under the Data Act are mere execution mechanisms and not legal contracts. Lastly, the wording in Article 2, Paragraph 39 of the Data Act, automated execution of an agreement or part thereof, can easily create confusion due to the fact that terms execution as a legal term, meaning signing, and performance as the act of fulfilling contractual obligations, respectively. This observation was inspired by the contracts concluded in UPCAST and is merely recommending an interpretive approach of the term. According to this approach, when reading this article, execution should be simply interpreted as running the smart contract codes, and agreements should be understood as referring to the broader legal commitments that code helps to automate. The objective of this analysis was to conclude on whether data sharing agreements concluded on the UPCAST platform qualify as smart contracts under the Data Act, because compliance with Article 36's requirements would need then to be ensured. It was concluded that UPCAST contracts would be best classified as electronic contracts with automatic negotiation capabilities, given that the agreed terms are not automatically enforced, but rather the execution relies on subsequent actions by the involved parties or systems outside the plugin itself. The obligation imposed by Article 36 would therefore not be triggered. To conclude, the three main key takeaways to take with you from this webinar would definitely include understanding the key role that data sharing agreements play in the context of the EU data market reality, the need for greater multidisciplinary cooperation in many cases, such as the one exemplified by smart contracts, by different scientists such as lawyers and computer scientists, and also that there's still way to go with respect to full automation of smart contracts. And with that, I would like to thank you for watching this webinar and warmly invite you to reach out to us if this topic is of interest to you. Have a great day.